Hey everyone, welcome to this training course on defensive cybersecurity. My name is Jonathan Elliott, and before we move forward, I just want to give you a little bit of a background of who I am. I am about to get a bachelor's degree in security and risk analysis at PSU. I've been a part of the information security field for over 10 years. I only have a Security Plus certification at the moment, but I have solid plans of getting some more certifications in the near future. I'm gearing my efforts towards AWS security right now, and then I'll probably look into some of the GAC certifications. So I specialize in defensive security, but have spent many years practicing offensive security as well. So the target audience, who is this course for? I would say the minimum requirements for this course is to have a basic understanding of operating systems and a basic understanding of networking. But if you're not too familiar with networking, you can still gain a lot from this course. I would say the recommended requirements for this course are experience with the Windows and Linux operating system, being familiar with them, experience with networking, understanding things like the OSI model, TCP/IP, and things like that, and some basic programming knowledge. We're not going to be talking about any programming languages in this course, but I think it would be helpful to your overall understanding of this course. And of course, any InfoSec experience is very helpful. Anywhere that you've studied or learned information security will obviously assist you in this whole entire course. So I designed this course for individuals who are novice to intermediate in cybersecurity. I found a solid balance between older security principles and newer technologies that are geared towards security. Information security encompasses a vast amount of topics and subfields, so I boiled it down to what I believe is the most important and actionable information. And just a quick note, the original syllabus for this class was longer than what I have currently released, but I had to reduce the size due to some unseen changes in my schedule and certain things. So I still cover everything I want to cover as far as topics go, but there's some things I had to cut out, and I think it's worth mentioning that. So throughout this course, I'm going to be making a bunch of different recommendations, and I just want to stress a few things first. First, I'm going to be focusing on free and open source products, so I'm going to try and stay away from the commercial paid products and try to stick to more free solutions. Also, I'm not affiliated with any of the recommendations in any direct or indirect way. So any of the recommendations that I make, I'm not receiving some type of financial incentive to do so. Of course, my opinions are my own and do not reflect any institution that I'm affiliated with. They're all just my opinions. And technology changes quickly. So one recommendation today might not be the best one by tomorrow. However, I will do my best to continually update the content. So if you're completely new to the information security field, you probably haven't heard of the CIA triad, but if you spent any time in this field, you probably have seen it at least mentioned once or twice. It's a very popular concept. It's a triangular principle that focuses on three components of cybersecurity that we need to be very concerned about, and that's confidentiality, integrity, availability, and accountability. And recently, accountability was added. Some argue that that takes away the whole purpose of it being a triad, but I think the accountability part that was added is very important. So obviously, confidentiality is a state of keeping or being kept secret or private. That's keeping data private, keeping it out of people's hands that don't need to see the data. Integrity, in this Google search definition, is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. But in the context of cybersecurity, it's ensuring that our data is untampered, ensuring that our data is not modified in any way that it shouldn't be. Availability as the quality of being able to be used or obtained, but in the context of cybersecurity, it's the quality of being accessible at any given time. When we refer to availability, we're referring to a computer or a server that is on and running and that we can connect to. And accountability is pretty self-explanatory. It's holding people accountable for their actions. So what are some examples of the CIA triad? The most popular example for confidentiality is encryption. If we want to keep things confidential, we want to keep them encrypted. We want to encrypt while data sitting on our drive, at rest. We want to encrypt while it's being sent over the wire, in motion. We want to encrypt while it's being used. So in this case, attackers can't use or view the data if it's encrypted. Even if they get their hands on it, they won't be able to do anything with it if it's encrypted. Now, integrity in the context of cybersecurity is ensuring our data isn't tampered and modified with, whether it's modified on the actual hard drive or the actual storage medium, or whether it's modified in transit over the wire. We can use stuff called hashing algorithms, or sometimes referred to as hashing functions, that are mathematical, irreversible functions where we stick data through it and it produces a fingerprint, a number, an alphanumeric fingerprint of the data that we stuck through this hashing algorithm. So essentially, if we have a text file that says ABC123 inside of it, and we stick it through a hashing algorithm, it will spit out a alphanumeric string, which is representative of that text file with that content. And even the slightest change to the text file will result in a drastically different output as far as the hash output goes. And then availability, like we said before, is the accessibility to data, is the ability for us to access a server at any given time. There's no downtime. It's always running. It's always connected to the network. And the best example of this in cybersecurity is data redundancy with backups. Having things like RAID arrays, having backups, whether they be stored offline or online, and accountability, holding users accountable for their actions. The best example described for this is logging. And we'll talk about logs near the end of this course. Before we move into any of the technical topics or any information related to risk analysis or any of the other concepts in cybersecurity, I want to talk about some security principles that will follow you and that you will see are very commonplace throughout your entire journey in InfoSec and cybersecurity. So the first quote, it's not if, but when. It's not meant to discourage you, but it's meant to describe it's no longer a question of if a breach will occur, but when will a breach occur in our networks, in our environment. It takes an attacker just one vulnerability to exploit, one type of method of entry to gain access to our systems where they can start pivoting to other systems. So again, like I said, it's not meant to discourage you, but it's meant to be informative that we have to band together and really pull together all of our resources and try our best to mitigate these threats and employ some of these different security tactics like defense in depth. So if a breach occurs, there is very limited damage and things like that. So the first principle I want to talk about is keep everything up to date. You'll hear me say this throughout this entire course. It's important that we always get security updates or any type of updates, because not only do they fix functionality issues and bugs that we see in software, but a lot of times they're geared to fixing security issues. And if we can keep our systems patched, we can employ things like patch management, which we'll talk in a few videos down the road. We can mitigate many issues. The second point is reduce the attack surface as much as possible. The attack surface is a theoretical view of everything that an attacker can use to leverage against us. So these are things like programs running on our computer, services in the background, and anything and everything that attacker can use to target and attack. The more stuff we strip out of our computers, out of our networks, the less stuff they can use to exploit, to find vulnerabilities. So again, you'll hear me say reduce attack surface as much as possible, and reducing attack surface and talking about it in many different ways throughout different slides throughout this entire course. And it's very important that we do so, because the less they have in their target, the less they have in their sights, the less they can use against us. The third point is the principle of least privilege. We want to limit the amount of privileges that anyone has as much as we possibly can. We only want people to have access to things they absolutely need for their job or for their goals or whatever they need. For example, if somebody in accounting doesn't need access to information or certain files in the research and development department, then they shouldn't have access to it. The less privileges people have, the better. The next point is a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, meaning nothing is impenetrable. That means we could have gray security all the way over here. We could have perimeter security, firewalls, things that are looking for all different types of threats, analyzing traffic, looking for anomalous behavior, all these different layered security approaches. And it takes one person getting phished, having a fraudulent email sent to them. They click and download a virus by accident, and the attacker now has access to the entire network. So it's not like, it relates to the question above, or relates to the quotation above. It's not if, but when. The next point is security versus convenience. You'll often find that we have a balance between employing security tactics and convenience for the end user. The more security we apply, the more multi-factor authentication, we have 2 or 3-step authentication, or we have the security policies that state you need to do this in a certain fashion, the less convenient it gets for our end users. And you might be thinking, why does this matter? We want to try and keep things convenient for the end users. We don't want to create enemies, first off. We want to create relationships. A lot of times security people are seen as the hall monitors. We're always telling you what you can't do, and we're kind of generally no fun in a lot of people's eyes. But more importantly, the less convenient something is, the more an end user, a colleague, a person in our organization will find ways around our security controls. So if we require some super complex password that's over 20 characters, that has a certain amount of uppercase, lowercase, and a crazy amount of requirements, you can expect a end user, since it's very, very inconvenient, you can expect them to write it down on a sticky note and keep it in their top drawer of their desk, which is a bad idea, which is bad overall, because if somebody sits down, opens up that first drawer in their desk, they can read the password and log in, and then it's game over. So we need to find that balance between security and convenience. Of course, don't allow them just to use password as their password, or password 123, but don't require them to write something that's 45 characters and extremely complex. We don't want to overkill. A, to ruin relationships. That's not something we want to obviously have happen. Or B, more importantly, because people will find ways around our security controls just to make their lives more convenient. The next point is the default deny all rule. So kind of the whitelisting is always stronger than blacklisting. When it comes to any type of deal, when we are implementing whitelists or blacklists, we always want to side with whitelists more. A whitelist only allows certain entities to do a certain types of things, whereas a blacklist says these entities, these assets, these IP addresses, or whatever's in question, these programs aren't allowed on our system. Blacklists are always going to be less effective than whitelists, because anyone can come up with a new type of software that is malicious, or can spin up a new IP address or new domain that's associated with malicious activities. So if we say, all right, we only allow these applications running on a system, anything beyond that, and anything beyond our whitelist won't be able to be ran. But if we say, all right, we have these 5 applications aren't allowed on our system, what's to stop somebody from making a new malicious application or spinning up a new domain, like I said before? Again, blacklists are something that are less effective, but they do have their place in security. So we also want to default deny all everything. That's kind of the same approach. We want to deny everything and then allow only certain things to actually take place, because it's a lot easier to add things to our whitelist instead of continually updating the blacklist and saying, hey, that's not allowed, that's not allowed. That's just going to be very cumbersome. The next point is the 80-20 rule, and this is very important, especially as it pertains to the first quote. It's not if, but when, and we need to reduce the attack surface as much as possible, and a chain is only strong as its weakest link. So we need to focus on the 80% of things that really affect us, that really pertain to our environment, the things that are the most 80% likely, the most likely things that happen to our environment. These other esoteric, very rare attacks, these new bleeding edge types of vulnerabilities that are, researched and displayed in white papers, while they are theoretically possible and there are plenty of reasons why we should take them serious, we need to focus on the things that are constantly seen and are constantly being targeted towards us. So for example, we need to focus more on phishing. We need to focus more on malware and viruses than we do need to focus on things like the new speculative execution vulnerabilities like Spectre, or these new type of rote hammer attacks, these new side channel attacks. Just because the malware, the phishing, the outdated software, old vulnerabilities that have been patched already, these things are more likely to happen or more likely to be exploited by an attacker, by an evil person, as opposed to these rare things. So it's a great rule to also keep in mind when we have so much on our plate. When we need to prioritize all these different things, we need to focus on the things that really matter more, that are more likely and more pertinent to our organization. And once we get the 80% out of the way, those things that are very likely, those things that are constantly seen in the wild, then we can focus on the 20%. The next point is the security control price should be less than or equal to the asset's price. So what does that mean? And it's pretty self-explanatory. What we use to protect something shouldn't cost more than what we're protecting. If we have for instance, to arbitrarily pick a gold bar that we're trying to protect, and the gold bar, for whatever reason, we'll just say is worth $5,000. We wouldn't use a $5 million safe to protect a $5,000 gold bar. It just doesn't make sense. Unless whatever you're protecting has other type of value. And that's where you need to really look into the intrinsic value of something. You can't put a price on Coca-Cola's secret recipe and formula as far as it being a tangible just piece of paper or a tangible set of documents, but it's very important to them. It's a trademark secret. It's something that their business is built around. So it has more value than the paper is printed on. And that's why they use a ridiculous amount of security to protect something that's important as their secret formula for their drink. Last but not least, well, the second to last not least, is security doesn't equal, and the exclamation mark equal means doesn't equal obscurity. So a lot of people will try and take obscurity and use it as a way to secure things. And what does that mean? They'll use obscure operating systems or obscure software or things that aren't really seen in the wild, hoping that if attackers come across it, they won't know how to attack it because it's something that's outdated or not really used or very esoteric. And that has always been a bad idea, from my opinion and from the opinion of many other experts in this field. We always want to use things that are not necessarily always mainstream, but going and using an operating system that has only a user base of 500 people doesn't mean you're any more secure than Microsoft Windows or a Linux operating system. Just because attackers don't see this thing in the wild doesn't mean they can't spend a few hours analyzing it, looking at the code, reverse engineering it. And if anything, they'll be more apt to find and more likely to find a vulnerability in something like the logic of the code or what have you that they can leverage to gain access, as opposed to something that's highly tested, highly vetted, and used by millions across the world. So don't use obscure softwares in the hopes that you are actually being more secure. Obscurity never equals security. And last but not least, you'll notice a picture of an onion on the right-hand side. This kind of goes to the principle of defense in depth. We want to treat security like an onion. There's multiple layers to everything. We don't just have one perimeter control and then anything beyond that is just a wild, wild west. We want layers of security. We want perimeter control and security like firewalls on the outside and things that are monitoring incoming and outgoing traffic. And then we want isolation inside of the network. We want to make sure that certain things can't communicate with each other. So if attacker does break in, they still have multiple layers of security to get through, just like an onion has multiple layers.